Hello everyone, RFG here with a review for Selfloss, an isometric puzzle game with some action-adventure and light platforming elements, available on PC, PS5, Switch, and Xbox Series consoles. Developed by Goodwin Games and published by Merge Games and Maximum Entertainment. Inspired by Slavic myths, you'll explore the land and sea as Kazimir, who with his staff will help the characters he meets on his journey in many ways, including those who need his ritual of self-loss. Puzzles are the main focus here, but they're usually split into multiple parts per chapter, and this is where the action-adventure and light platforming elements come in. Kazimir's staff plays a large role in how you'll make your way through most of the game. Controlled with the right stick and available from the start, the staff's main use is to emit light. You'll use this early on to make your way through most of the game by shining the light on glyphs, usually to open new paths. You can also interact with characters and objects as indicated by the prompts near them. Sometimes this is just for info, but you can also pick up items, or in some cases you can climb or jump from platforms. Your other staff's main use is to fire a light beam. These light beams are meant to destroy or calcify miasma creatures, your enemies in Selfloss. Miasma creatures have a bar of their calcification shown when they're being targeted. When that bar is full, they'll either be destroyed, calcified, or stunned. Your light beam does have limited energy, as shown by a meter when you're controlling your staff, and if it runs out, you won't be able to use your light beam. When an enemy is destroyed, your energy is automatically returned, but when a target is stunned, that energy is temporarily stored there. When on a boat, your usage of the staff is roughly the same. You can still emit light and fire light beams, but your movement is a tad bit different. You also do lose access to a staff ability you have on land that you don't have while on a boat. On land, you have the ability to leave your staff in place and retract it. Shining light on Kazimir while leaving your staff in place will cleanse miasma damage he may have accrued. Miasma damage is taken in certain areas. This is different to health damage that is given by enemies. Near the beginning of Chapter 1, you'll gain a sickle. I briefly spoke about calcifying enemies, but I didn't really describe what that means. When an enemy is calcified, they're in a temporary locked state where they can be damaged by Kazimir's sickle attack. If an enemy breaks out of its calcified state, you'll have to calcify them again until defeated. If you run out of light beam energy, you can retract what's been spent. And while you can't use the sickle on the boat, you do, at a point, get a boat dash ability that allows you to attack enemies in the water, break through obstacles, and briefly speed up your movement, and the ability to row your boat to better control your movement. You'll also gain the ability to fire impulses of light from your staff. Its main use is to destroy miasma crystals that obstruct your path, but there are some enemies that can only be calcified by these impulse of light attacks. All of these abilities are used in some way to assist you through Selfloss's puzzles or navigate throughout the chapters in the game. Kazimir himself has limited basic abilities like having a roll and a sprint. Emitting light through your staff is probably the most important ability you have for progression. It's used to shine on glyphs to open paths, but also used to make your way through miasma, attract certain creatures to make them follow Kazimir to a destination, and more importantly, used to absorb essence, in what is essentially a fishing minigame. There's a large emphasis on sea creatures as key figures to moving on when grieving in Selfloss, and extracting this essence becomes a key item to completing chapters. Shining your light at these sea creatures initiates a sequence where you latch onto them, and in certain intervals, your staff's light line will signal you to extract from them. When the bar is reduced to 0, the essence is added to your inventory. Other items needed in your quest are attained through more centralized puzzles or quest lines. Some of these will usually require you to interact with characters or the environment to retrieve items for them, using your staff to calcify enemies either with your beam or impulse of light to defeat them to progress. Some of them will require the abilities of your staff in other ways. Sometimes you'll have to enter dungeon-like areas to do the same. And many of these puzzles and quests will also be needed to be completed while on a boat. Selfloss is a mostly linear adventure, but certain chapters do have a somewhat central area to discern where you are. Whether that's the case or not, there are some optional questlines that may require you to backtrack a bit to find. These usually lead to hidden scrolls lost and left behind by Miro, a character you meet in the prologue that contain lore. Bosses or boss-like arenas usually signal the upcoming end of a chapter, along with turning in key items to complete the Selfloss ritual. These bosses generally do have some puzzle-type element to them and are pretty interesting. Completing a chapter puts you into a transition phase that can be mostly linear, but inevitably leads you into a new area and chapter. These in-between phases are where you'll learn more about Kazimir's past and the events that lead up to Selfloss. And while most of the story is played out in-game, the chapters are pretty self-contained. And the scrolls that I brought up earlier, which I genuinely found enjoyable to read, are mostly related to chapter events or characters. However, you will see some reoccurring characters throughout the game. While the game's messaging about grieving and moving on are core to its plot, that does mean that there are dark elements involved, and both the light and dark parts of that play in its visuals. And the visuals are gorgeous. Maybe not in the technical level you will see in bigger projects, but there's some genuinely beautiful imagery shown in Selfloss. Light and dark. It helps that the art design makes everything look like a moving playset that makes it inviting even with the dark undertones of its theme, and still shows the scale of the world. Music has close to the same feel as visuals. It's a lot more subdued in how it handles the light and dark aspects of the theming, but does keep the general atmosphere even in seemingly intense moments. Its main theme is also beautiful, and is placed perfectly in-game. In terms of difficulty, there's really only minor setbacks for dying or succumbing to miasma. Checkpoints are placed frequently, so not much progress is ever really lost. As for puzzles, I don't think there's anything too complicated for someone to figure out in a reasonable amount of time, but I think the way the overall structure for each chapter works does give it a nice bit of complexity. I do think the camera could use some work though. Sometimes it felt slow to angle itself to where I went, and sometimes it felt like it was having trouble deciding which direction to go in. As for recommendations, I think players who like a story-based puzzle game and action-adventure game players can find a lot to enjoy about Selfloss. There is a satisfying narrative going on from beginning to end. Keep in mind that there's not a lot of optional content to look out for, and I don't see much replayability here. So take a look at the respective story page that you're interested in for Selfloss and see if that's worth it for you. Anyway, that's it for me. Let me know what you think below. Thanks. Bye.